Review copy provided by PlayStation. 2 years ago, Insomniac graced us with Marvel's Spider-Man, an experience that really made you feel like Spider-Man. Widely acclaimed for its breathtaking web-slinging, its jaw-dropping set pieces, its visceral and fluid combat, and its heartfelt narrative, it was without question one of 2018's best games. In comes Insomniac once more to offer us more of that experience with Spider-Man Miles Morales, which takes the foundation of the original and builds upon it in significant ways. While some have taken to labeling it an expansion, I would say it definitely does feel like a full-fledged, standalone experience that distinguishes itself enough from the original to feel fresh with an all-new story, an all-new campaign, an all-new protagonist, all-new characters, awesome new combat mechanics, and technical improvements on the PS5 version. Miles Morales is definitely to Spider-Man what Last Light was to Infamous Second Son. It is a shorter game, about half as long as the original, but we're still looking at roughly 12 to 13 hours that it took me to beat the main campaign while doing a decent amount of side activities along the way, and I imagine completing all activities on your first playthrough will take you between 16 to 18 hours, maybe 20 for those who really take their time with this game. And this is without including New Game Plus and new stuff that does get unlocked there. It's actually roughly the length of Infamous Second Son, for those who want a point of reference, and despite being a shorter game than the original, we are still talking about a quality 12 to 20 hours sold at a cheaper than usual $50 base price. One of Marvel's Spider-Man's greatest accomplishments was a narrative that did an incredible job of humanizing both protagonists and villains, with complicated relationships and conflicting motivations culminating in both truly wholesome and truly heart-wrenching events. And it pleases me greatly to see that Miles Morales didn't forget what made the original such a special superhero story, the human element. I won't say much as to not spoil the story, but suffice to say that relationships are tested, and the game does a great job of making you understand where the game's core villains come from. You've also got your usual mustache-twirly villains with zero redeeming qualities like Simon Krieger, but the more central villains are really well developed. I also really fell in love with Miles Morales as a character who harkens back to a much younger, greener, teenager Spider-Man who is still learning the ropes and has a level of energy and optimism that maybe the more grizzled, worn-out, and veteran Peter Parker Spider-Man lost a bit of. At the same time, Miles is still naive in some respects. He's still coping with the death of his father from the events of Spider-Man PS4. He lives under the shadow of the original Spider-Man, and for Miles, this is a journey of self-discovery, of getting over his own insecurities, and finding the confidence to become his own version of Spider-Man. Miles and Peter do share a couple scenes together, and their mentor-mentee chemistry is really on point, in no small part thanks to excellent performances by both Najee Jeter and Yuri Lowenthal. But this is, first and foremost, a Miles Morales story. Peter Parker takes a back seat as he takes a trip away from Manhattan to help MJ with some journalism stuff, and he leaves Miles to help defend the city in his absence. Speaking of Peter Parker, this is going to be a matter of personal preference, but I still prefer the original character model, but it is what it is. Playing as Miles will feel familiar to Peter in key respects. The exhilarating world traversal and web-slinging mechanics feel equally phenomenal as Spider-Man PS4, and it still never gets old, being just automatic enough to feel effortless but implementing just enough manual inputs and maneuvers to force players to pay attention for maximum efficiency. Basic maneuvers like standard attacks, web strikes, dodging, jumping, slinging, throwing objects, finishers, aerial maneuvers, it's all there from the original. But at the same time, everything does have a distinctly Miles feel to it. With web-slinging, for example, the animations for Miles evoke a completely different personality from Peter's style of slinging, and you've even got a new navigational maneuver that ties into Miles' unique bioelectric venom powers. Even details like idle animations where Miles will tap out some beats with his hands, or the way Miles balances himself when he web shoots on a ledge or a perch sells the illusion that this is a different person entirely, even if under the same guise of Spider-Man. Manhattan is once again gorgeously and authentically realized in Miles Morales, though with a snowier and more festive aesthetic that is representative of the winter holiday setting. The cherry on top is the game's performance mode, with the PS5's additional graphical prowess enabling the title to run at a buttersmooth 60 frames per second, which makes such a huge difference. Spider-Man PS4 felt fine locked at 30 FPS, but 60 FPS here is truly sublime and adds to the rush of web slinging and how much more reactive it feels, and I'm looking forward to revisiting the remastered version of Spider-Man PS4 with the same performance fidelity. Equally striking is the PS5 version's insane loading times, which are practically non-existent. Fast traveling from one end of the city to the other literally takes about 2 seconds. Same with going from main menu into gameplay, about 2 seconds. Hell, I timed myself going from PS5 standby mode and then booting the console up and going into Miles Morales gameplay, and it took merely 25 to 26 seconds, which is faster than a single loading time in most AAA titles from last gen. For comparison, on the PS4 version, going from main menu to gameplay takes 24 seconds, so that's 12 times slower than the 2 seconds or so on PS5. It's seriously kind of crazy, and I definitely use features like fast travel a lot more frequently as a result. It was just a great feeling to never get interrupted during gameplay. Now, I briefly mentioned Venom powers for web slinging, but where they play a much larger role is combat. Deploying Venom abilities is quite easy. Just hold down L1 and press the appropriate face button that matches with a specific Venom power. I cannot emphasize enough how impactfully satisfying it is to use these powers and how smoothly it all flows into combat. The game ensures you aren't just spamming these powerful attacks by limiting their use to Venom meters that must be expended, which you can build up through standard attacks and dodges, but these meters do fill up pretty quickly as you beat up bad guys. Once you master the flow of Venom powers with standard attacks and dodges, I'm telling you, you're gonna look and feel like a complete badass.
People are trapped over there! We gotta finish this so I can help those people! You're not strong enough for us! You can't stop us, fighting!
Miles' Venom powers are also utilized for some environmental puzzle solving, involving having to power up or power down generators and create wiring connections, which can be a nice change of pace and preferable to the original game's puzzle minigames in my opinion. Much like Peter, Miles also has access to various gadgets he can deploy during combat, from your standard web shooters to unique gadgets like holodrones that will fight alongside you, gravity bombs that will pull enemies together, and remote mines that are very useful for stealthy takedowns. It's worth noting Miles only has access to these 4 gadgets versus Peter's 8, though the addition of Venom powers more than makes up for that deficit. In addition, true to the character, Miles has the ability to camouflage himself, which enables new stealth strategies and escape options not possible with Peter Parker, which further makes up for Miles having less gadgets than Peter. All around, Miles Morales' combat and stealth feel better than the original because of what they built upon an already excellent foundation. Add on top of that 60 frames per second in performance mode for a smoother, more fluid, more reactive gameplay experience, and chef's kiss. The game also does a fantastic job of teaching all of its mechanics and systems gradually while constantly introducing new enemy types who will counter certain moves and abilities. As your move list grows, so will the enemy variety, forcing players to switch up their playstyle and use specific powers and attacks against specific enemies. Once you get a large mix of all of these different enemy types, as you have leveled up quite far into the game and gotten all of these different skills, it's in encounters like these where combat really becomes especially engaging and satisfying. Equally well-paced is the main campaign, which not only presents some truly jaw-dropping set pieces, engaging combat and stealth sequences, and memorable boss battles, of which there are fewer than the original but still are quite good, but also occasionally slows things down as needed to give Spider-Man some respite and shine the spotlight on Miles, the man behind the mask, through compelling dynamics with characters like his mom Rio, his uncle Aaron, and his best friends Finn and Genki. There's just a really great ebb and flow to this game's tight campaign, with well-paced highs and lows that consist of both lighthearted moments contrasted by emotionally heavy moments, a great balance of comedy and drama bolstered by great performances across the board, and really well-written dialogue. And much like with Spider-Man PS4, banter between characters during phone calls or broadcasts from Jonah and others remain as entertaining as ever.
If you dare. Wow, evil laughs are so much harder to pull off than they seem.
Oh, man, he's right. Do bad guys take classes in this stuff?
I may go as far as to say that the pacing of this campaign might actually be even better than the original, as it forgoes less desirable mission types like MJ stealth missions. You're always playing as Miles, you're always Spider-Man, and generally I enjoyed just about every mission from the campaign. Spider-Man PS4 does have a larger scale campaign overall, but Miles Morales is its own thing that is more focused on establishing the foundations of Miles as a character, as his own Spider-Man. And even beyond that, this game's narrative acts as a nice tie-in to the inevitable Marvel Spider-Man 2, and it serves that purpose pretty well. Beyond the campaign, you've got plentiful side activities to partake in. As the campaign progresses, new activity types will unlock and dot the map, ranging from lootable cash that will yield tech parts for upgrading gadgets and crafting suit mods, time capsules that are basically akin to Peter's backpacks in the original, enemy compounds that must be cleared out, collectible sound samples that tie into Miles' passion for music, side missions that can be tracked through a Spider-Man app where people post requests, a variety of crimes that are very similar to what we saw in Spider-Man PS4, and combat, stealth, and traversal challenges that Peter Parker left throughout the city to train Miles, which will in turn teach players certain techniques while also unlocking new skills for completing these challenges, with some hilarious Hollow Peter dialogue to look forward to.
Someone will save me, please! Oh, thank you, Spider-Man!
You're well. Oh, right. Fake people.
You'll never get away with this, evil holograms! I knew you'd save me, Spider-Man!
Amazing.
All activities will yield what are called activity tokens, which combined with tech parts can be spent on crafting cosmetic suits that unlock as you progress through the campaign or complete activities, suit mods that grant passive upgrades, and upgrading Miles for gadgets. Main missions and side activities will also yield XP to level up Miles, and that way you can earn skill points that can be spent on a wide variety of skills that focus specifically on combat, venom powers, and camouflage powers. There is a really fantastic sense of progression with how often you level up and how it feels like there is always something new to unlock, though it's also still gradual enough where I never felt overwhelmed, just a good pacing for progression. Now, this being a shorter game, there are less skills, less suits, 19 versus 28 when Spider-Man PS4 first launched, and versus 42 if you include post-launch suits for Spider-Man PS4, and less gadgets in this game. But for the length that it offers, there's enough there to unlock where the whole experience feels rewarding and progression feels really well paced. And I've got to say, some of the suits, like the Spider-Verse suit combined with mods that add the same graphics and lower frame rate animation style as the Into the Spider-Verse movie, are pretty fantastic. Now, the drawback to some of these side activities is that they do tend to feel repetitive and somewhat copied and pasted, which goes doubly true for Miles Morales since there are plenty of stuff that have been recycled from the original, so a lot of these activities I'm essentially revisiting from what I've already played in the last game. However, new activity types like capturing sound samples for music are different enough to mix things up a bit. Despite some of the sameness in activities though, because of how incredibly fun web-slinging and combat are in this game, I didn't mind it too much and the game never felt like it became tedious. Not to mention the quantity of these quests feel just right and not too overbearing. They don't flood you with so many side quests that the game outstays its welcome. Furthermore, they serve as a great way to test out any new mods, gadgets, or skills you might attain as you progress through the campaign, and these side activities do all contribute towards valuable character progression and unlocks. Granted, there is more variety with the side missions you undertake through the Spider-Man app, which denizens use when they need help from Spider-Man, and these tend to offer serviceable narrative hooks and quirky scenarios like a mission involving rescuing this adorable cat named Spider-Man by the owner, among other ones that I won't spoil. And then aside from certain side activities feeling repetitive, another issue is a few technical issues that I stumbled upon. Nothing super serious that ruined my experience, but still worth highlighting. A small problem was that I'd occasionally see Spider-Man's model briefly wearing the classic suit before I had unlocked it, and one other time suit previews just didn't show up outright, though this was easily fixed by exiting and re-entering the menu. One bigger issue I encountered though was actually really strange. After completing this side activity, Spider-Man for some reason turned into a street lamp. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Spider Lamp. Now this only happened to me once in my entire playthrough, and not gonna lie, I was laughing my ass off. The game did eventually crash shortly thereafter, but I didn't really lose any progress, and it took very little time to just dive back into the game, and by then the problem was fixed. It was just the one time, never encountered anything like this again. It gave me a good laugh though, not gonna lie. And then a more prominent issue that persisted from Spider-Man PS4 is that when I try to quick zip to ledges and perches, there are times when the game just doesn't recognize where I want to go, and so I zip to an undesired destination, and it happens often enough where it can become occasionally annoying. But with all said and done, this is for the most part a really polished game that I had an absolute blast with. It ran wonderfully in performance mode, and I did activate Fidelity mode to see how the game's visuals are affected by RTX lighting, which adds visual elements like real-time reflections and I guess more realistically behaving lighting at the expense of dropping the game's frame rate to 30 FPS. I personally didn't feel the trade-off was worth it. I much preferred 60 FPS, but hey, it's nice to have the option. Beyond polish, there's just a lot of love and care put into this game's presentation. Character models, especially in cutscenes and especially on the PS5 version, look really fantastic with impressive minute details like flecks of snow on Spider-Man's suit. Animations are vibrant and lively, especially Miles' combat and web-slinging animations. The city feels alive with vehicles zooming past, denizens walking around, and crowds actually reacting in cool ways like fanboying at Spider-Man when he's around, or partying when Spider-Man dangerously throws an object in the middle of the street. Cinematography is excellent, set pieces are just a sight to behold, and the music, much like with many other aspects of this game, evokes a distinctly Miles personality and style, and it's just fantastic. Also unique to PlayStation 5 is of course the DualSense's haptic feedback and adaptive triggers. While this game implements these features much more subtly than, say, Astro Playroom, enough of it is there where it is noticeable. When shooting webs, when making big jumps, when swinging through the air, when striking enemies, when using venom powers, when electricity courses through Miles' body, when there are explosions nearby. All of these have their own frequency and intensity of vibrations associated with them that definitely offer greater depth than traditional Rumble. As far as adaptive triggers go, they've been configured in such a way that there's a bit of resistance only towards the very end when you push the trigger down, which is a sensation akin to how Spider-Man shoots his spiderwebs by flexing his middle and ring fingers, and then when those fingers reach the palm, there is some kind of trigger mechanism there that shoots the web. That feeling and sensation is what the adaptive triggers in this game seems to attempt to simulate, and I think it works. And as Miles shoots webs swinging through the city, you can actually feel a subtle sensation of something stringy shooting out from the controller. Again, it's subtle, nothing earth-shattering, or anything you cannot live without, but it is still kinda neat nonetheless. And if it's not your thing, you can choose to adjust the intensity of the haptic feedback or turn off haptic feedback and adaptive triggers entirely. With all said and done, I can confidently say that Spider-Man Miles Morales is a pretty awesome and memorable entry in the series and a very strong PS5 launch title. Some repetitiveness, a few technical issues, and this being generally a shorter game aside, I'd call this a must-play for a PS5 owner. It's familiar enough where you'll fit right at home if you play the original, but there's also enough new stuff that I felt like I was ultimately playing a full-fledged, standalone entry. Miles Morales is a game with so much heart, and it truly does capture the joy, agility, and prowess, and of course hardships of filling the shoes of this unique version and style of Spider-Man, all while presenting a narrative and characters that you'll be invested in. It serves as a great setup for a full-fledged sequel. It serves as a great addition to Spider-Man PS4 for those craving for more of that experience, and I just had an absolute blast with this superhero title. I cannot wait to see where Insomniac takes the series from here.
Maybe leave a little room for the new guy, just in case.